Of all the relationships in the Brown family, the one between Meri and Robyn might be the most quietly heartbreaking, because it didn't start as a rivalry. It started as something that looked a lot like love. When Robyn first came into the family, Meri was one of her biggest champions. Meri welcomed her. Meri embraced the idea of her. There was a closeness there, a sister-wife bond that, in the early days, seemed genuine and warm. And that's exactly what makes the way it ended so painful to watch. Because somewhere along the line, that warmth curdled. The champion became the woman asking for her money back. The friend became someone who, by Meri's own recent words, carries real hurt about how things turned out. So tonight, let's trace the full arc of Meri and Robyn from genuine sisterhood to a fracture that may never heal, and try to understand what actually broke between them. To appreciate how far this relationship fell, you have to remember where it began. When Robyn arrived as the fourth wife, it was a seismic event in the family. New wives don't just join a plural marriage without disrupting the existing balance, and there was tension and adjustment all around. But Meri, in those early days, was notably welcoming. She and Robyn developed a bond that, for a time, seemed like one of the stronger connections in the household. Meri didn't treat Robyn as a threat. She treated her as a sister, and for a woman in Meri's position as the first wife, already feeling the strain in her own marriage, choosing to open her heart to the newest wife was a real act of generosity. She gave Robyn the benefit of every doubt. And here's a piece of context that makes the early closeness even more poignant. Meri's own marriage to Kody was, by this point, already struggling. Meri knew what it felt like to be on the outside of her husband's attention. So you might think she'd resent the new wife who was capturing so much of Kody's focus. But instead, at least at first, she seemed to lean into the sisterhood, as if the bond with Robyn could be something that sustained her even as the marriage didn't. That's a beautiful, vulnerable thing, to seek genuine connection with the very person who, in a different framing, could be seen as your replacement. Meri chose sisterhood over jealousy, which is exactly why the eventual fracture cuts so deep. So what happened? How does a relationship that started with that kind of warmth end up where it is now? Recently, Meri has spoken publicly about what fractured her relationship with Robyn, and I want to be careful to stick to the spirit of what she's actually said rather than putting invented words in her mouth. The picture that emerges is not of a single explosive betrayal, but of an accumulation, a slow erosion of trust, a growing sense that the closeness wasn't as mutual or as honest as Meri had believed. When someone you embraced as a sister comes to feel, over time, like someone whose presence coincided with your own diminishment in the family, that realization doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, and by the time you can name it, the friendship is often already gone. Let me lay out the emotional logic of it, because I think it's something a lot of people will recognize from their own lives. Imagine you welcome someone in with open arms. You defend them, you bond with them, you treat them as family. And then, over the years, you slowly notice that as they rose in standing, you sank. As they got the house, the attention, the security, you got the back of the line and the unpaid debts. Now, none of that is necessarily that person's deliberate doing, but the human heart doesn't always separate correlation from causation. When the arrival and ascent of one person lines up with your own decline, it becomes very hard to keep feeling warm toward them, even if you can't point to a single villainous act. The friendship doesn't end because of one betrayal. It ends because the math of the relationship stopped feeling fair. And then, of course, there's the money, which we cannot ignore because it sits right at the center of the modern version of this fracture. Remember, this is the same Robyn whose home was reportedly funded in part by Meri's money from the proceeds from Meri's Las Vegas house, that Meri says she was never repaid. So the financial dispute isn't separate from the relationship breakdown. It's woven right into it. Imagine how it must feel to have welcomed someone as a sister, helped fund the very home she and her children live in, and then to find yourself years later still waiting to be paid back, while that relationship has gone cold. The money makes the emotional betrayal concrete. It turns an abstract sense of unfairness into a literal unpaid debt. And it's very hard to maintain a warm friendship with someone when there's an unsettled financial wound sitting between you. Now, I want to be fair to Robyn here, because this channel doesn't do one-sided hit pieces. And Robyn's perspective matters even when we're telling Meri's side. From Robyn's point of view, she may genuinely feel that she never asked for special treatment, that she was simply living the life she was brought into, that the favoritism the fans perceive was never something she engineered. It's entirely possible that Robyn experienced the same family from the inside as a person doing her best in an impossible situation, not as a schemer collecting advantages. And if that's true, then the fracture with Meri is doubly tragic. Two women, both feeling wronged, both feeling misunderstood, neither of them cartoon villains, just two people crushed by a structure that pitted them against each other from the start. Because that's the deeper truth I keep coming back to. Plural marriage, by its very design, asks women to be sisters and rivals at the same time. It asks them to love each other while competing, however quietly, for the same finite resources of one husband's time, attention, money, and affection. That is an almost impossible thing to ask of human beings. And when you set people up in a structure like that, fractures aren't a malfunction. They're the predictable outcome. Meri and Robyn didn't fail at sisterhood because either of them was a bad person. They were placed in a system that made genuine, lasting sisterhood between them nearly impossible. The structure was the saboteur. The women were just the ones left holding the broken pieces. There's also a specific cruelty in the order of things. Meri was first. Robyn was last. And in this family, last seemed to mean favored. So Meri experienced something brutal. She was the original wife who watched the newest wife receive the security, the attention, and the standing that Meri herself had longed for. To welcome that person as a sister, and then to watch her receive everything you wanted, is a recipe for a very particular kind of grief. It's not simple jealousy. It's the ache of having given your warmth to someone whose rise seemed to come at the cost of your own place. And I think that ache, more than any single argument, is what ultimately hardened Meri's heart. Let me address the fans for a moment, because the fan community has long had strong feelings about Robyn, and I want to handle this responsibly. There's a widespread fan belief that Robyn was a calculating presence in the family, that she strategically secured her position at the other's expense. Now, I want to be crystal clear that this is a fan interpretation, not an established fact, and Robyn has never agreed to that characterization. People have watched 15 years of footage and constructed a theory from the patterns they think they see. But a theory built from edited television is not the same as proof of someone's inner motives. So when we talk about the Meri-Robyn fracture, I think it's much fairer and much more accurate to locate the cause in the structure and in the accumulated hurt than in any cartoonish villainy on Robyn's part. The fracture is real. The simplest fan explanation for it is probably too simple. What I find most moving about all of this is imagining what it costs both women to have lost each other, because there was something real there once. In a family full of tension, Meri and Robyn had a genuine bond, however briefly, and now that's gone, replaced by hurt and unsettled debts, and a coldness that comes through in how Meri talks about it. Two women who once leaned on each other, who once chose connection over rivalry, ended up on opposite sides of a fracture that the family structure all but guaranteed. There are no winners in that. Even Robyn, the so-called favored wife, lost a sister in the process. The favoritism that may have secured her position also isolated her, because you can't be the one who came out ahead and still expect the warmth of the women who came out behind. And here's a question I think is worth sitting with. Is this fracture permanent, or could it ever heal? Because these women shared decades, raised children alongside each other, lived an entire era of their lives together. That history doesn't just evaporate, but healing would require the wounds to be addressed, the money settled, the hurt acknowledged, the honesty exchanged. And in a family that has shown how slow it can be to settle even a clear debt, I'm not optimistic that the emotional accounting will be any faster than the financial one. Some fractures stay fractures. Not because reconciliation is impossible, but because nobody does the hard, humbling work required to repair them. I hope I'm wrong, but the trend doesn't favor a reunion. So when I step back and look at the whole arc of Meri and Robyn, here's what I see. I see a relationship that began as one of the genuine bright spots in this family, a first wife generously embracing the last wife as a sister. And I see it slowly broken, not by a single dramatic event, but by years of accumulated imbalance. By a favoritism pattern that placed them on opposite sides of the family's fortunes, by an unpaid debt that turned hurt into something concrete, and by a structure that asked them to be sisters and competitors at the same time. The tragedy isn't that they were enemies. The tragedy is that they could have been, and for a moment were, real sisters. and the family they lived in made that impossible to sustain. Now, I have to talk about the single most consequential event in the entire Meri and Robyn story, because without it, you can't fully understand the wound. In 2014, Kody legally divorced Meri, and then he legally married Robyn. Let me be clear about why. Because the stated purpose was so that Kody could legally adopt Robyn's children from her previous marriage. To do that, he needed to be legally married to Robyn, and since he could only be legally married to one wife, that meant legally divorcing Meri first. Now, the family framed this as a purely practical legal maneuver. It wasn't supposed to mean anything about spiritual marriages. But think about how that had to land for Meri. She was the first wife. She was the only wife who had ever held that legal status, and she gave it up, on paper, so that the newest wife could have it instead. Whatever the official explanation, the symbolism was devastating. The original legal wife was legally replaced by the last one. You cannot overstate what that did to the foundation between these two women. Even if Meri agreed to it, even if she understood the legal logic, there is a profound emotional difference between understanding something with your head and feeling it in your heart. Meri went from being the one and only legal wife to being a spiritually married wife with no legal standing, while Robyn stepped into the legal position Meri had vacated. And as we've discussed in other contexts, that legal status turned out to matter enormously when it came to houses and land and money down the line. So the 2014 divorce wasn't just an emotional blow. It was the moment the structural deck got reshuffled in Robyn's favor, in a way that would echo through every financial dispute that followed. The sisterhood was asked to absorb that and stay warm. That's almost more than any friendship could bear. And layer onto that the catfishing period, which came not long after. Here was Meri, having just given up her legal marriage, then enduring a deeply public and humiliating online deception. It was one of the lowest points of her entire life, and it played out in front of the whole country. In a true sisterhood, that's the moment everyone rallies around the wounded sister without reservation. Whether Meri felt fully held by everyone in the family during that time is something only she can truly speak to, and I'm not going to invent feelings for her. But I'll say this. When you're at your lowest, and you're also the wife who just lost her legal standing to the newest wife, it would be very human to come out of that period with your sense of where you stood and who was truly in your corner permanently altered. There's also the matter of how the show itself framed these two women over the years, because the edit shaped how millions of us perceived this relationship. At various points, Meri was portrayed in ways that cast her as difficult, or distant, or the source of tension, while Robyn was often framed more sympathetically, as the sensitive one, the peacemaker, the wife whose feelings needed protecting. Now, whether that framing was fair is a real question. Editing makes choices, and if you spend years being edited as the prickly one, while another wife is edited as the gentle one, that shapes not only how the audience sees you, but potentially how the family dynamic itself gets reinforced. The portrayal can become part of the problem, hardening roles that then become harder to escape. So when you stack it all up, the early, genuine warmth, the 2014 legal divorce and remarriage, the catfishing low point, the years of perceived favoritism, the editing that cast them in opposing lights, and finally, the unpaid money for Robyn's home, you start to see that the Meri and Robyn fracture wasn't one event. It was a dozen events, layered over more than a decade, each one adding a little more weight until the bond simply couldn't hold. Friendships rarely break from a single blow. They break from accumulation, and few relationships in reality television have accumulated as many quiet wounds as this one. I think there's a universal lesson buried in here, and it's part of why this story resonates so far beyond the show. We've all had a relationship that didn't end with a dramatic blow-up, but instead just slowly went cold, where you look up one day and realize the warmth is gone, and you can't point to the exact moment it left. That's what makes the Meri and Robyn story feel so real. It's not a soap opera betrayal with a clear villain and a clear victim. It's the much more human, much more familiar experience of two people who genuinely cared about each other being slowly pulled apart by circumstances bigger than either of them. And that's sadder, in a way, than any villain story could ever be. Which is why, when people ask me who the bad guy is in the Meri and Robyn saga, my honest answer is that I don't think there is one. I think there's a structure that set two women up to fail at sisterhood, a series of decisions that consistently favored one over the other, and two human beings who did their best inside a situation that made genuine, equal friendship nearly impossible. Blaming Robyn entirely lets the structure off the hook. Blaming Meri for her hurt ignores everything she absorbed. The truth is more uncomfortable and more honest. Sometimes good people end up estranged not because either of them is bad, but because they were placed in an arrangement that quietly guaranteed it. And here's one last thing I want you to hold on to, because it reframes the whole story. The fact that the loss of this friendship still clearly stings Meri all these years later is actually evidence of how real the bond once was. You don't carry hurt over a relationship that never mattered. The lingering ache is the proof of the original love. If Meri felt nothing, there'd be no story here at all, just two people who drifted. But she does feel something, and what she feels is the weight of a sisterhood that meant a great deal and then was lost. In a strange way, that hurt is the most honest tribute to what Meri and Robyn once had. The grief is the receipt for the love. So I'll turn it over to you now, because I know this is a relationship a lot of you have strong feelings about. Do you think the Meri and Robyn fracture is mostly about favoritism and the unpaid money, or do you think there's a more personal betrayal underneath it that we haven't fully seen? And here's the question I most want answered in the comments. Do you think Meri and Robyn could ever genuinely repair the relationship, or is that bridge burned for good? Tell me where you land, because I read every comment, and the perspectives on this one are always fascinating. If you want me to do a full deep dive tracing the Meri and Robyn relationship season by season, from the warm early days to the cold present, let me know, and I'll build that next. And if you appreciate that we try to understand both women as real people, instead of reducing one to a hero and the other to a villain, then do me a favor and subscribe, because nuance is what we do here. And there is so much more of this family's story still to tell.